in verses 1 to 3, he talks about how important it is to experience God's mercy and to offer our bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. And it's a part of our service, is a part of our worship. It encourages us to be transformed by the renewing of our minds, and then we're going to be able to test and approve what God's will is, and God's will is good, and God's will is pleasing, and God's will is perfect. We come to Romans chapter 12, verse 9. We're going to find these verses, and what I'm going to do is read through them and then come back and look at them verse by verse, and we're grateful for the technology that helps us see it on the screens here today. Love must be sincere. Hate what is evil, cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people in low position. Do not be conceited. Do not repay do not repay anyone evil for evil, but be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it possible, as far as it depends upon you, live at peace with everyone. I'm going to go back to verse 9 there. It says, love must be sincere. It really talks about how important it is to not pretend, how important it is to be real as a Christian. Every once in a while, we'll find someone who stops going to church, and oftentimes someone who stops going to church stops because they've run across some people that they were hoping they could trust to give a strong, positive Christian example, only to discover that in church they would say one thing, but in their jobs and in the workplace or in school, they would live a different way. And this was no different in the life of the New Testament church and the church at Rome. So the Apostle Paul says, in light of spiritual gifts, in light of our commitment to Christ, in light of longing to make a positive influence in our community, it's important that our love, number one, is unconditional like God, and that's the Greek word agape there, and that it needs to be real, it needs to not be pretending, it needs to be trustworthy. And so we want to remember how important it is for us in the church and outside the church to live in such a way that we are welcoming of new people, that we're accepting of new people, that we are people of grace, and that we're forgiving, and that we do our very best to share the high quality of love that God has for us, the agape love, a wonderful, wonderful, unconditional love. Now, I know we're heading into a political year. We can't hardly ever turn on the television without hearing about some comments that someone has made that's running for the highest office in our land. We realize that in light of this, that we're going to see plenty of people making promises that they can't keep or won't keep. Some of them probably shouldn't even keep, depending upon what promises they are. So we have to be people of grace. It doesn't mean that we give up on our political system, but we may decide how much we're going to watch it on television or how much we're going to read about it in the newspapers. The one thing we can do is make sure that we don't act like some of these folks act. It's going to get aggressive. It's not going to get so pretty. It's already been aggressive. It's not been so pretty already. And we have till, what month is that? November? Well, it's a long time. But the important thing is that the attitudes of some of the people that are running for the highest office in the land don't creep into the church. Because sometimes Christians get that aggressive in the church, and believe me, it's not pretty. We've probably all, to some degree, witnessed that. Well, God's love is special because it is this high quality love that is unconditional, and he calls us to love each other in that same way. At the same time, we realize that there is evil in the world. We're not going to just live overly optimistically and avoid the evil because it's in the world. But the Bible here is pretty clear. It talks about hating what is evil. And, other translations in the Greek word actually talks about detesting what is evil or abhorring what is evil. And so the honest response to evil in the world is that we don't like it. We don't approve of it, that we are invited by God himself to dislike it and to even hate it. Well, when bad things happen to good people, it's a painful thing to see. At the same time, it reminds us that we do live in a world where there's plenty of terrorists. You may have noticed that 100 places in America have been targeted by terrorists. One of them in North Dakota. Where do you suppose that is? It's in the beautiful city of Minot. Well, why would they target Minot? Military base, okay? So it becomes a target. Read the police report online and talked about people in Minot don't need to be concerned. People living near the military base there, concern is a little higher. 6 of the people on that military base have already been targeted by terrorists. Well, is South Dakota free? Maybe we could just all head south. Well, sorry, they're not free either. One of their military bases has become target as well. The one just outside of Rapid City. Well, here we go. We live in a great world, best world in the nation, but we're not free of terrorist activity. And so we can dislike it, we can detest it, we can abhor it, we can hate it, but it doesn't mean that we stop looking for the good. Love must be sincere, it hates what is evil, but it also clings to the good, and that gives us the proper balance. And so as we look at people's lives in the world, we realize that not anybody is perfect, and there's plenty of people that are imperfect, but we look at the good in people and we look for ways to build up others. And the whole idea of clinging to that which is good in the New Testament church came around the idea of finding the good. Well, I always appreciate when people do good. When people work hard to keep our communities safe, when people work hard to keep our country safe, when people work hard to make a positive impact on the world in which we live. Well, you may have read the story in the newspapers, heard about it on television, or read about it on Facebook or one of the social media sites of the Navy person that was retiring from the Navy, lived out on the East Coast, I think it was like Virginia, and decided to move back home to Washington State. And they decided to stop in the beautiful city of Omaha, Nebraska. Had a U-Haul truck, a pickup truck with a trailer and a Jeep on top of it, and a motorcycle, by the way, in the box of the pickup truck. So they were tired from driving. They pulled over in a parking lot by the casino. They must have gone in, found some food to eat, and a cheap place to spend the night. They came out in the morning. The U-Haul truck was gone. The pickup truck was gone. Motorcycle was gone, the Jeep was gone, it was all gone. Whatever they had, their entire life savings that they brought along, most of their most valuable possessions, including family pictures, were all gone. Well, luckily, with the hard work of the police, some of the stuff was found. The only thing they're still looking for is a motorcycle. Now listen, motorcycle in the wintertime. Who has use for that in the wintertime? I kidded somebody the other day that they should take their motorcycle, put a ski on the front instead of tires on the back. And they claimed they didn't want to do that because it might scratch the paint if they, flipped it over on the ice somewhere. Well, here we go. We come back to looking at those things that are good. We have wonderful places in America, wonderful places in North Dakota. We have wonderful places that do really good work, lots of people that do a lot of good work. But they're not perfect. You probably read in the newspaper of an ambulance person that was helping lots and lots of people only to give in to the temptation that while they were helping someone, they also helped themselves. They needed a little extra cash. I think it was $126 or $127 that they took. Well, they got caught. Well, that doesn't mean that all the ambulance people are bad. Of course not. It simply means that there are a few that give in to temptation, and they've been corrected, and we come back to looking and finding the good. Well, so what is our focus? Our focus has to be, in verse 10, to be devoted to one another in brotherly love, to honor one another above yourselves. We're going to talk a little bit about that, about how important it is to be devoted to each other. Well, to illustrate it, every once in a while, my wife and I, when we meet on a Friday night, we sit down and we look for a movie to watch. Well, one of the movies that we agree on, well, most of the time she really prefers to watch the Food Channel or Sewing Channel or something like that. I'm really not into the Food Channel too much or the Sewing Channel too much. I would rather watch sports, and she would rather not watch sports, but one of the programs we agree on is Blue Blood. Some of you have probably watched that. It's a wonderful story of a family in New York City. Grew up in a long generation of police officers. In this, the movie itself that we watch on television has the history of the grandfather and the father, and 3 sons, of which one did not survive active duty as a police officer in New York City, and a daughter that is a part of the judicial system as, I think she's like a district attorney or something like that. And anyhow, the thing about this particular family that I like is that they eat together. They have special times during the day when they come around the busyness of their jobs, and they eat together. And if you watch the episode long enough, you'll notice that there is no TV running in the same room where they eat together. They have a traditional meal where they offer grace, and they ask God's blessing on the food, and they try not to bring in the work experience to this meal time. But there's also some reality to that TV program from the standpoint that they're all different, that they agree to disagree, but they do it with honor, and they do it with respect, and they never lose their devotion or their commitment to each other. Well, as we think of life, we realize how important it is to be devoted, how important it is to be committed, how important it is to live with honor. In fact, the Greek word here gives the idea, if you look at the specific influences of the language here, it talks not only about honoring one another casually, showing respect, but it talks about outdoing one another by showing honor. Now, most of us have probably lived in enough different places in the world or had some experiences with different countries. We realize, and even different companies, we realize that not every company has a mindset of outdoing each other with honor. In fact, some companies, at least I've worked in, were just luckily that people would tolerate each other. But the whole idea of outdoing one another with honor is extremely important because it gives us that proper balance again. Verse 12 goes on to help us. Actually, let's cover verse 11. Verse 11. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor. You know, never lacking in zeal talks about our passion for Christ and our passion for the good news that God offers for us, and also talks about the role of the Holy Spirit in keeping us fired up for the Lord. To bring in an illustration about the Bison playing for the national championship, Carter Wentz came as a surprise, was able to play that championship game before he enters the draft, which is probably a good thing. And people were wondering when they saw him announced, and the team kept it a secret because they really wanted the opposing team to plan for a different quarterback. And quarterbacks each have their own way of playing the game. But the thing that amazed me was the passion that he came out to play with. Even though he'd been injured and for months not been able to play in a real game, came out with such passion and played so well for all 4 quarters and did whatever it took to win and did whatever it took to do their very best. Well, that's the idea here. Never be lacking in zeal. We might look around us and see people that are not all fired up. That doesn't mean that we have the right to lose our focus or lose our passion for advancing God's kingdom. So we want to continue to keep that zeal. We want to remember to continue to keep that passion. We want to remember to keep that spiritual fervor. And we want to remember that it is the Lord that we're serving. Moving on now to verse 12. It talks about being joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Well, the Greek word joyful there is really the English word to rejoice. Over and over again, we come to our prayer times and we are reminded, and we make a point of reminding ourselves that God is an awesome God, and we find great joy in that, and we rejoice in that over and over again. And the word hope can also be translated as faith. It means that we have confidence in God. Now, I know we're heading into a political year, and you got some people that get up and give a national address and talk about America as being great. You have the next person getting up in a debate and talking about America as being in a mess. Well, who do you believe? Is America great, or is America in real trouble? Well, during an election year, you can hear people say all kinds of things. We have the good part of America. And yes, the debt is larger than it's been for a long time. There's definitely some things that aren't so positive. But at the very same thing, there's much we still have to rejoice in. And God invites us to keep our confidence high, not only in Him, but in the work we're doing in the country. We are to be rejoicing in the faith and the confidence we have in God's plan, in God's kingdom, and in God's work. It means that we are also encouraged to be patient in affliction. Yeah, hard times come, but what do? We endure through them. We continue to do our very best to move forward. And we continue to be faithful in our prayer times and be loyal in our prayer times. And I was on the farm growing up. Every once in a while we'd come home from church and the wind had blown on a day like today, where it was like 10 to 15 degrees below, and sometimes there was a 30, 40 mile an hour wind, and it would drift all the roads shut. Well, there were times when we would park off the main road and we began to wonder, okay, should we take the chance to drive this vehicle through all the snowbanks and get as far as we can get until we're stuck, and then walk the rest of the way home? And most of the time we would get within about a mile or 3/4 of a mile, so a 3/4 of a mile walk wasn't too bad, even though it was, across some pretty deep snow. Well, frequently we simply hunkered in, put the vehicle straight down the road, went through all the gears. We had an old pickup truck, a 1950 Ford pickup truck, and we had cement blocks on the back, great big cement blocks, which brought the front end up and gave it lots of weight. It went through lots of snow. And it was pedal to the metal until we hit the house. Oh, it created great memories. Oftentimes we made it home. Yes, once in a while we'd get stuck. We'd have to shovel it out, back up, and go through a field and drive across enough hills. And if we went fast enough, we could get through an awful lot of snow. Well, that's the idea in this particular passage of Scripture, that we are not to be slowing down when tough times come. We are actually to be speeding up and picking up momentum. We are to be hunkered down in our prayer times and hunkered down in God's Word and focused and moving forward. Well, verse 13 then says, we are then ready to share with the Lord's people who are in need. And we're also to be mindful of how important it is to practice hospitality. So we look around us and we realize that a lot of us are fairly well off. And I enjoyed Mission Sunday last week, where we talked about the different ways that we do reach out and we do help people who are going through tough times. And we do continue to become very practical, and we help people of all different ages. And some of you last week sat into some of the mission opportunities where it talked about the backpack program, and you talked about the domestic violence shelter in town here, and we talked about the different groups that are helping in so many different ways. And so we continue to do all we can to help people who are in need, and so grateful that God has given us the resources to do that. Hospitality was really a big deal in the New Testament church. Without hospitality, it's likely that the New Testament church would have had a very difficult time to survive. Because on the day of Pentecost, they came to Jerusalem, where God the Holy Spirit was poured out into the hearts and lives of so many people. And then from there, people went out. And in order for them to find a place to stay, other Christians simply opened their homes. Now, it was risky to open their homes, and it was risky to help these people, but it was the right thing to do. And of course, today in America, a lot of people like their privacy. A lot of people are more concerned about the condition of their home and the fact that they want it dust-free when they entertain someone or welcome someone, when really the idea of hospitality in the New Testament church had nothing to do with the dust in the home. But it had everything to do with focusing on the hearts and the lives of the people who come to visit. You know, I've never actually seen dust in the house kill anybody. Have you? Maybe thought it might, but honestly, I haven't. But you know, I have seen hospitality help a lot of people, especially when people are new. When they come into the doors of the church for the first time, how wonderful it is for someone to invite them out for a bite to eat, or invite them to the house to sit back and visit for a while, or to even take time in church to visit. Christian hospitality simply does so much good and goes so far. In verse 14, it says, "Bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse." Well, there we have it. We realize that not everybody's going to like us. In fact, the more progressive we are in our faith, the more attention it's going to catch. You know, we are human beings that like comfort zones. A lot of people prefer things not change at all. In fact, there are churches that are closing their doors in America. There's plenty of United Methodist churches closing their doors. And one of the ways they help themselves to do that is that they want to stay comfortable. There are some churches that hang on to as much money as they can, and when the money's gone, they decide, well, the money's gone, now we're going to close the doors. Well, that's an unfortunate way to live. But we want to remember that to move forward means that we might not always agree on what direction to go. So we do it prayerfully. We move forward and we want to reach our potential as God's people. And it means that not everybody's going to like what we might do in a community. But if someone doesn't like what we're doing as a church, instead of retaliating and putting them down or belittling them in our minds, we want to make sure that we come from a point of offering a blessing. And that was key in the New Testament church because persecution happened a lot. It happened a lot, and it was difficult to see, it was difficult to witness, but it was so crucial that New Testament Christians were coming from a positive place of blessing those who were mistreating them. And offering that blessing in our lives goes a long way. Sometimes when we've heard that someone said something we haven't liked, or they've put us down, and we became aware that they said something pretty mean and nasty, well, if we spend the rest of our lives ignoring them or avoiding them, that really doesn't do any good. There are some people who are simply very good at prejudging people without getting to know them. Well, that isn't the way Christ called the New Testament church to live. It's not the way God calls us to live. Instead, we are to bless those. Verse 15 then goes on to say this: "Rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn." It means that we are wanting to be sensitive, that we are wanting to be careful with how we interact with other people. When I was growing up, I was pretty much a morning type person. I woke up pretty happy in the morning, only to go off to school to realize that not everybody wakes up happy in the morning. So I had to learn not to be too happy early in the morning because not everybody liked being around happy people. Well, I went off to college, even in a Christian school, discovered, guess what? It's no different there. Not much different in a Christian school than it was in a public high school. We have people who are people. But we want to be sensitive to where people are at. So we long to rejoice with those who rejoice, Mourn with those who mourn in verse 16 I really like because it talks about living in harmony with one another. The Greek word living in harmony means to think before we speak, or to think before we act. In order for there to be harmony in our lives, we want to understand how important it is to think things through. Oftentimes, disharmony comes in our homes, our lives, our family, extended family, when someone just comes up and says something without carefully thinking it through. And it's not necessarily so much what gets said, but how it gets said, with the tone of voice that something gets communicated with. So the Greek word here reminds us here in the Bible that we are to carefully think things through so that we can live in harmony with one another. We're not to be proud of our place in life, but we're to come from a place where we can associate with all different kinds of people, especially with people who have very little. And then verse 17 reminds us not to be conceited. And verse 18 is the focal point of our text. Let's go on to verse 18 as well. It talks about not repaying evil for evil in verse 17. But in 18, it says, as much as is possible, as far as it depends upon each of us, live at peace with everyone. Now, I'd have to say, from what I know of you folks, that so many of you are doing such a wonderful job with that. Doing a great job of simply trying to do what you can to live at peace. I know that we have people around us that don't live that way. But we try to do whatever it takes to live in a way that God's peace is with us, and that we do whatever we can to provide a peaceful coexistence and a peaceful relationship with those around us. Well, it means that we have to think, it means that we have to pray, it means that we have to keep rejoicing, and it means we have to keep taking the high road. Even when disappointments come, even when difficulties come, even when financial changes happen in our lives, we keep coming back to the place of peace. Our closing hymn is a wonderful hymn entitled, It Is Well With My Soul. And as we look at it and we turn to it, it's found on page 377. We're going to notice that the author of this song, the writer of this song, lost his entire family at sea when they were traveling by ship between America and Europe. And he comes back to the very same place where the ship went down, on a different ship, of course, and he sees these words and writes these words. And it talks about peace like a river that attendeth my way when sorrows like sea billows roll. Let's think about the rest of the songs as we, and the words to the song as we sing them. Page 377, It Is Well With My Soul.